Okay, again, thank you for joining us. Here in the Northern Hemisphere, we are experiencing the middle of winter. Here in the Washington, D.C. area, we actually had a little bit of snow today. And so that was part of the reason we decided to talk about winter flying. We also know that winter occurs at different times around the world, and not everybody flies in snow and ice conditions, but there's certainly lessons to be learned across the board. I'd like to introduce our speakers today. First, as always, Jim Viola, the President and CEO of Helicopter Association International. We have Kevin Vinatieri, who is a pilot for the California Highway Patrol. We have Scott Boughton of Palisade Aviation, and who is also the Vice Chairman of the HAI Training Working Group. And we're grateful to have both of them join us today. This is a participatory event. We do encourage you to ask questions about anything during the webinar that you have interest in knowing more about. If you have a question, please use the control panel on the side of your screen. There is a question module. All you need to do is type your question in. We will receive it, and we will try to answer as many of the questions as you submit as we can before the end of the webinar after the main presentations have occurred. This video webinar is being recorded. The video will probably be available. We used to try to get them out on Fridays, but it looks like Monday is probably a more likely date due to a number of factors. You can find this recording and all of our webinars on the HAI website at rotor.org/webinars. Now I'd like to introduce Jim Viola, the President and CEO of HAI, to come on and talk with us to begin with.
Well, great. Thanks, Dan. And it's a pleasure to have Scott and Kevin here today to talk about some of their flying and what is classified as winter, which can be a little misleading. Really, it's just probably not the best weather. And you got weather, snow, cold, all depending on where you are in the hemisphere. And I know we've got a bunch of internationals again today. So thank you very much from wherever you're joining on these at work webinars here at HAI. You know, inclement weather can exist in all parts of the world, and knowing how to respond to each of those situations is what helps determine if you fly again another day. And on that topic, I want to draw your attention to a new video. If you haven't seen it out there yet, it's produced by the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team and supported by HAI. The video is called 58 Seconds to Live, and it presents helicopter-specific information about flying from visual flight rules into IMC weather, or instrument flight rules. I think you'll agree once you've seen this video. If you haven't, it does a good job of delivering the message to have a plan when flying in deteriorating weather. And I think today maybe you'll hear about some of the plans that these professionals make. Scott, certainly, being a vice chair of our working group, our training working group, and which is another example of the working groups here at HAI. If there's something you see in industry that you don't think the association is addressing properly, please bring it up to me at president@rotor.org, and we would put a work group together as necessary to solve any of the issues out there for industry. So on this, as far as this video, we'll display the link of the video at the end of the webinar and the wrap-up information following the question and answer session. And HAI and the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team are dedicated to reducing accidents through any means possible, and that truly is what we're trying to do with these at-work webinars here on Thursdays. So this video is just the beginning of a much more elaborate training program that HAI and the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team will introduce tied to this video this spring. The 58 Seconds to Live program was in development weeks before the NTSB hearing that happened this Tuesday, but we felt it was an important element to bring out and show you what we're working on to meet some of the training recommendations. The new program is also scheduled to be in the subject of an upcoming webinar later this spring, so please keep an eye out for it. So let's get started with today's topic on winter flying, and we'll get Kevin back up here with Dan. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate that. And we'll wait. Kevin will be coming up here in just a second. There we go. Kevin, do you mind introducing yourself to us real quick? I know I gave just a brief introduction, but maybe you can tell us just a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, been with the California Highway Patrol for the last 25 years, 23 of them in the Air Ops program. I served also 20 years in the Army flying helicopters as well.
We appreciate your service both for the military and the state of California. Thank you so much. What kind of aircraft are you flying there for the California Highway Patrol, and what kind of crews do you normally fly with?
We fly a crew of 2, and we're flying the AS-350 or the H-125 B3s. Pound for pound, I've flown a lot of different airframes, and for a multi-use, and not advocating one or the other, but A-Star is awesome aircraft, awesome aircraft. We fly a crew of 2, pilot and then flight officer observer. My partner is a paramedic because we're in a regional program. We do a lot of, like I said, high mountain rescues, a lot of winter flying, especially this time of year.
Okay, now you're out of the Auburn Airport, correct, in Central California?
Correct.
Okay, so you're flying probably up into the Sierra Nevadas on a regular basis, summer and winter. Is that correct?
All the time. Yeah, we're the primary search and rescue helicopter for the Lake Tahoe, which is a high volume tourist destination. I mean, there's just winter and summer. It's all year round.
Roughly what percentage are you flying on search and rescue, and then what on just general law enforcement?
I want to say, and this is just pulling it out, I think we did about 80 rescues last summer. So, and those are the ones that were completed. That doesn't include all the others that we were launched to that either canceled or the person self-rescued. So we're up in the mountains frequently, weekly, easily.
Okay, well, let's focus on the winter time. What kind of risk mitigation factor or work do you do before you take off on a mission this time of year?
Well, the first thing we get the call, we have I have a motto definitely, is their emergency isn't our emergency. So we're going to do everything right. We're not going to let that emergency push our standards, push our training. And then the next step is, first and foremost, do we have the weather to go? Because all this other planning is moot if we don't even have the weather to get up in the Sierra Nevadas. Then it's performance, which obviously the wintertime aircraft perform awesome because it's cooler, but you always have to leave that, okay, we got the weather, we got the planning, we have an out, or we're just gonna launch blindly into the mountains and then make it up as we go along. It's not the Wild West. You gotta have a plan, and that's what you guys keep harping on. You gotta have a plan. You just can't, I mean, things do change, so you have to expect the unexpected, which we constantly do with weather in the mountains in the wintertime. But you still got to have that fallback. Hey, at what point am I going to do this? At what point am I going to do that?
Are your aircraft configured any differently for winter flight than they are for the summer flights?
For the most part, it's standard. The only thing we really do is we add some survival equipment, some snowshoes. The aircraft get equipped with bear paws to help settling the aircraft in the snow. And that's really about it for as far as winter versus summer.
So do you, how about you and your co-pilot? Do you train yourselves any different? Do you prepare differently for winter flights and winter rescues?
Yeah, we just make sure we're prepared for the cold weather, because fortunately in this part of California versus maybe the Central Valley down Mount Whitney, Fresno area, they're way more remote, where you can almost snowmobile, or if we had an accident, let's just say we had an accident, you could almost get to us in every geographic spot for the most part within at least a day, depending on the weather. So long-term survivability isn't the forethought, it's surviving the cold and that kind of stuff.
What kind of altitudes and temperatures are you flying at this time of year?
Well, altitudes, some of the mountains in our division are around the 12,000 foot range. Down south a little bit, they go up to 14, and that's just PA, not even DA. Obviously, winter weather, DAs aren't as high as summer, and yeah.
How does your training assist you in conducting these kind of operations? I mean, it sounds like you're making so many flights, the training might not even be a normal part of your day. You may have to schedule training around your other flights.
We have our departmental requirements require 4 hours every quarter. So 3 hours, it could be everything from emergency procedures, mountain flying, night vision goggles, and at least 1 hour of simulated instrument. So that's every quarter, and that's the minimums. We do obviously more than that. Every helicopter pilot is an instrument rated pilot, Even though the aircraft isn't certificated for IFR flight, it has an autopilot, it has a robust instrument package, just the aircraft isn't certified. So if the weather got bad and if you inadvertently went IMC, go to your training, use the systems, and you will survive.
Okay, Kevin, well, I appreciate that. I mean, I first became aware of your winter rescues. You were on the CBS News in Sacramento a week or so ago for the work that your unit did. So I'm certain that the public who gets themselves into problems are very grateful for the work you do. I actually would like to go ahead and allow you to turn your camera off, and then I'm going to be bringing Scott up, and we'll get Scott started with his presentation here very shortly.
Cool. Cheers.
And we'll see you in just a moment again for the Q&A session. Okay, Scott, I did pass the presentation controls to you, but I see you're on here twice, and so I hope I gave you the right controls. And Scott, looks like you're muted at the moment.
Go ahead and share it to the other Scott, and because I'm seeing a invitation to share on the other login there.
Okay, let's try that one.
There we go. All right, let me bear with me for just a moment here. Let me pull this presentation up.
Sorry, I think I minimized it by accident. Apologize for that. If you go up here to the top of the screen, display settings, Scott, that should allow you to change to there we go.
Yep, so we got a couple of, which window are we controlling here? That's the question, right? Okay, sorry for the little bit of technical difficulties there. Thanks, Dan. Let me just go ahead and kick it off here.
Please, go ahead.
Okay, so as Dan mentioned, my name is Scott Boughton. I'm actually a Army-trained Black Hawk pilot. Spent a fair amount of my career in cold weather assignments. Spent a few years in the Gulf of Mexico, which was not exactly a cold weather assignment, but did carry with it some other weather-related winter weather pattern challenges. I've been a helicopter air ambulance pilot and check pilot for a number of years now, and flying in Kansas, Ohio, Colorado, Iowa, some of the garden spots of the country in terms of cold weather. I do want to say one thing that was not in my intro is I would like to consider myself a student pilot, even though I've been flying for over 21 years. Every time I take to the air, every time I even talk about flying, I'm hoping to learn something even today. So maybe somebody's comment or question at the end of the show will bring something to my attention that I didn't know about. So I'm not the only person who knows anything about cold weather flying, and I'm certainly not the world's preeminent expert in it. But I do hope I have some things that I can share with you, and some tips and tricks picked up along the way. A lot of these are things I've picked up along the way, and probably maybe a half and half tips and tricks that friends of mine had suggested. Each one of these subjects I'm going to talk about today could be a whole webinar all in itself. I'm going to kind of go over a little overview here of the different subjects I'll be discussing. But I'll kind of give you a fair warning. It'll be a kind of a 30,000-foot view of all of these. I'll go into a little bit more depth sort of later in the presentation. I think for the person who's never flown in cold weather before, maybe this will be kind of a wake-up call to kind of learn what they don't know. And for people who've been flying in cold weather way longer than I have, maybe there'll be some reminders here, some things you hadn't thought about, or a different perspective. So maybe a little bit of something for everybody. Let me go back here. Personal gear, weather, protecting the aircraft, aircraft limitations, pre-flight, startup and taxi. You can see we're going to kind of cover a little bit about everything. And route considerations, landing and shutdown, a little catch-all section toward the end, and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions and feedback at the end. A friend of mine said this one time, and I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. No such thing as bad weather, just poor clothing choices. We can apply that to being prepared for aircraft, consider aircraft equipment. We could say weather preparation. I really like the fact that Kevin led off with the idea of doing everything right and always having a plan. So you'll see that theme come back a few times throughout my presentation. No presentation about winter weather flying would be complete without talking a little bit about personal gear or survival equipment. Kevin mentioned a couple things that are on my list here: snowshoes. Well, I'm not going to go into detail on a lot of these little bullet points here, but just as kind of a non-inclusive list of some of the things that just came to mind when I think about things I want to have with me in the weather. The most important thing is that you're prepared for the environment you're flying in. If you're doing a super extreme cold weather flight across the city of Detroit in the winter, you're more concerned probably about which Walmart you do your precautionary landing at versus maybe having a sleeping bag or snowshoes with you. You're up in the Sierras like Kevin and their crews, yeah, you're going to want to have some of that extra stuff. One point I do want to make about survival equipment, and that is in an emergency, a true emergency landing where you perhaps even crash the helicopter, you may not get to have any survival gear unless it's actually on your person. So I carry a little I don't know, a little pocketbook size pouch of survival equipment I keep in my flight suit pocket. I picked it up at REI for a few bucks, a space blanket and some fire starters, a sewing kit's in there if I really get bored, I suppose, and a fishing kit. Kind of interesting stuff there. Another point I'll make here on this slide, having an overnight bag. This is not maybe what you think. I'm not talking about being prepared to spend the night in the bush. I'm thinking more, I have an overnight bag with me. I'm prepared to spend another night in the hotel so I can make the right decision and just not go if the weather's marginal. I want to have that overnight bag as kind of a, we'll call it an insurance policy against making a dumb decision. Jumping right into the fun stuff here. Now, this is not going to be a discussion about cold front physics and the all the finer points of the weather advisory circular from the FAA. I want to cover a couple of high points here. Winter weather patterns. Jim said it best. You know, it's not just a winter cold weather thing. Winter brings with it different types of weather and different risks, even in warmer climates. So, in general, winter weather tends to be a little bit more extreme than other weather patterns. You may find a different type of fog in the Bay Area, San Francisco in winter versus summer, you know, different times of day, you know, and how that works. The important thing here is pilots, pay attention. I go someplace brand new, I want to talk to the locals. I want to find out exactly what they know and listen to them about what the weather patterns are. I'm going to watch the news. I'm going to listen to the radio. When Aunt Mildred calls me up and says, my left knee hurts and I don't think you should fly today, I'm going to take her seriously because she has a way of telling what the weather is doing or it's changing. I'm going to put that all together. I'm going to make a best decision I can about what I think the weather's going to do. And then I'm going to kind of pay attention. Did it do what I think it was supposed to do? And then try to learn from that so I can be a better weather forecaster in the future. Something else, a cold weather kind of consideration. You may have never seen the the designator UP, Uniform Papa, in an automated weather observation. This stands for unknown precipitation. And that's something that kind of catches my attention because the precipitation sensor on the AWOS doesn't know what it's looking at. It's not sure whether it's rain, snow, freezing rain, and that's a pretty good indication that I might not want to go there at that time. Frost, this is just going to be something you have to deal with. You know, you have to scrape the window on your car, you're going to want to have a plan for frost with a helicopter. I'm going to go into more detail on frost a little later on. Here's another one. I love this one. This picture I just put up there, this webcam image, was taken about 10 miles from an airport that at that time was reporting 10 miles clear skies. So even though there may be weather reporting, there may be lots of longer stretches. I'm sure Kevin deals with this all the time in the Sierras. Okay, it's great that the weather's good at the airport. What's it like up in the mountains? I don't know. So pull up a webcam. This came from the Colorado Department of Transportation's website. No discussion about weather would be complete without talking about inadvertent IMC. This is not just a winter thing, of course. This could be a problem at any time of the year. In the cold times of the year, it makes it a little bit more complicated though. And that's because fog, flat light, blowing snow, other more extreme weather situations make it more likely you could end up inadvertently in the clouds. And then it's kind of a 1-2 punch. Once you get there, there's a good chance your helicopter might frost over, freeze up, or, you know, worst case, ice up to the point where it can't fly anymore, and then you're really in trouble. It's just not your day at that point. And that leads to our last winter weather, summer weather, spring weather, Pilots need to learn to say no diplomatically. I'm sorry, sir, ma'am, I'm not going to be able to get you to your destination. If you look at this webcam right here, this is what we would have to fly through to get you where you're going. I know it looks nice out right here, but we're just not going to be able to do it that way. Sorry for the inconvenience, but I think you'll appreciate me making the right decision. So don't be afraid to say no. Flat light, big problem in cold weather flying. Not just cold weather flying. Anytime we have some kind of a smooth, featureless, contrastless surface and a kind of a gray overcast or some kind of a diffuse lighting situation going on, anyone who's flown in the Gulf of Mexico over Vermilion Bay, what we used to refer to as Vertigo Bay, if there's no wind, that thing becomes like glass and you can't tell which end is up. The key here is having reference points, some kind of items of contrast. One guy told me once, look, if you have one blade of grass you can look at, then they'll be better than nothing. Just ask the A-Star pilots in Alaska that piled in one after another, trying to rescue the person who crashed into the side of the hill due to flat light. Mostly on overcast days, can be a problem though if you're dealing with landing in the shadow of a mountain. You're kind of in the kind of a in-between lighting there, and it's like you're landing in a cereal bowl full of milk. Who knows where the ground is. It's a very real hazard any time of the year, but it becomes more of a problem in the wintertime because of the possibility of having a snow-covered ground. So the ground that used to have lots of contrast no longer does. There are some products out there that can help. I have a yellow lens on one of my helmets. That helps a little bit. I haven't flown with the rose-colored lenses yet, but I've heard that those are very good products to kind of help minimize the effects of flat light. I guess you could say that's a good time to look through rose-colored glasses. Sorry, bad joke. Icing. Now we're getting into some more cold weather specific things. What is known icing? According to the FAA, and my little note screen here is kind of goofing with me here. Known icing is basically the pilot's reasonable expectation that the aircraft could accumulate ice. And that's based on the pilots using all available information to the pilot. Does it mean I'm going to get ice on the aircraft if I'm below freezing and there's visible moisture? Not necessarily, or I might. How do I know? There are products out there we'll talk about here in a moment that'll help us determine the probability, but the fact remains you just don't know until you get up there if it's below freezing and there's visible moisture, whether you could ice up. The definition according to the FAA, I think, is purposefully vague. So kind of keeping in Kevin's theme here, having a plan. If you find yourself in a situation where you're accepting flight in visible moisture below freezing, you've got to have a plan to get out of it in an expeditious manner. That may be going down out of it, it may be going up through it and getting to clear air on top, but you got to have a plan or have the equipment to deal with it, blade de-ice and all the appropriate equipment. Personally, I just do not fly IFR in the clouds when it's below freezing at my proposed flight level and within a couple thousand feet for that matter. As a matter of fact, one company I flew for doesn't even allow pilots to fly in IMC if it's less than 5 degrees C. It's kind of an extra safety margin. If I still want to fly IFR, there's ways to do it. There are some programs, some EMS programs in New Hampshire, Vermont, the Seattle area. They have low altitude and route structures built based on hospital-based GPS approaches that kind of let them fly at slightly lower altitudes than maybe the guys in the Cessnas can. And that allows them to avoid the freezing level occasionally. But on the really, really cold days, they're on the ground as well on an IFR day. So how do we know where the freezing level is? The freezing level chart, these images, and ironically enough, these images were taken just a few days ago, and they were all within a couple of minutes of each other, so you can kind of see how some of the charts correlate to each other. This shows me that most of the northern US is just freezing level at the surface. If I'm trying to fly IFR in a helicopter without de-ice equipment, I'm probably looking down south. Even northern Texas would be kind of a marginal flight for me. Yellows and oranges are actually good in this case, unlike thunderstorm radar. The current icing product or the forecast icing product gives us a little better idea in addition to the cold temperatures, where's the moisture and where's the likelihood of icing. You can change this based on your altitude, as well as your the probability you want to look for is 25% probability or 50% probability. We could probably do a whole class on this chart right here, but we won't. I just want to point out maybe the red hashed area there, kind of in northern Oklahoma and some other parts around the country. That kind of points out the super cooled large droplet threat. So you have water that's potentially below freezing that as soon as it hits your helicopter turns to clear or glaze ice. Very dangerous. I'm not flying in northern Oklahoma, probably VFR even that day, because that's a pretty dangerous situation. If it's bad enough, the forecasters will publish an air met for icing. That's something to kind of keep an eye out for. Doesn't mean you can't fly VFR in that area, but it does mean if you end up in the clouds in an IMC, you could end up with an icing problem. And of course, PIREPs. Not just icing PIREPs, but you may actually look for PIREPs that report the cloud tops. I mentioned a minute ago, you need to have a plan to get out of the ice. Well, if you know the tops are at 6,000 feet, then and the freezing level is at 5,000 feet, that's a little less risk. I'm still not going to go personally if it's cold up there in the clouds, but it does kind of change the picture a little bit. One little thing, you're not going to be able to see this from where you are, but right in the middle, kind of north central Tennessee, there's a PIREP for icing. And if you look at this just to the right of that, north central Tennessee does not include an air met for icing. So just because you have a forecast, air mets, and maybe even no PIREPs that show icing doesn't mean it's not possible. And anytime you're flying in visible moisture below freezing, you need to use extreme caution. So let's protect our helicopter so that if we do decide to go fly, we'll have a better time of it here. I'm not sure if you can actually read the little message that's written on the horizontal stabilizer of this S-76, but in my humble opinion, the hangar is the best way to protect your helicopter. If you have a hangar, just put the aircraft in the hangar. Put it in there early before it gets covered in frost like this. If you don't have a hangar, covers, a good set of aircraft covers make a really nice, a really good substitute. The key here, you look in the top left corner of the screen here, that cover laid on the ground. I decided to take this A-Star rotor head cover and lay it out on the ground, figure out which end is which, and learn how to put it on when the weather was actually still pretty nice. You don't want to be learning how to put your covers on when you're dealing with the snow starting to fall at midnight and it's below zero. That's not fun at all. When the precipitation shows up, cover early and hopefully cover before the precipitation actually hits the helicopter. If you put blade covers on over wet rotor blades, I'll see you in the spring, fella, because who knows how long it's going to take to get those things to defrost. So just something to consider there. Why do we need to preheat the mechanical components of the aircraft? Well, without getting into a mechanical engineering dissertation here, the metal components on the aircraft are different types of metals that heat up and cool down at different rates, and shocking metal components with sudden heat when they've been cold soaked is just not good for the longevity of the aircraft, increases wear and tear, and will end up costing you money in the long run. I didn't issue this disclaimer at the very beginning of the discussion that I meant to. You always have to follow the manufacturer's recommendations. I may say, oh yeah, just go ahead and insert something into the flux capacitor, and that's a great idea. Okay, that's nice, Scott, but my rotorcraft flight manual says don't do that. Well, don't do that then, and don't email me and complain about it. So always following the manufacturer's recommendations. A lot of aircraft are available with TANUS heaters, little block heaters, electrically powered, that will actually keep things like your battery, your rotor, or your oil reservoirs, gearboxes, instrument panels, keep them heated so that it decreases that wear and tear. And if you're in a helicopter air ambulance application, everything's already warmed up. You don't have to wait for a while for all the components to come up to temperature. Saves money, saves time, and in combination with a set of good covers is really, really helpful. You may consider putting a space heater in the cabin. Just be careful that the space heater is actually serviceable. This actually came out of an aircraft at a program I worked for. The med crew went in to check on their medical gear, and they said, it kind of smells kind of funny back there. Well, that's because the heater was about to burn the helicopter down. So be careful with anything that wasn't designed to be in the helicopter. in the helicopter heating it up. But this is a really good way to keep the internal components, the cabin components heated up. And even just the heater in the cabin or up in the cockpit kind of blowing on the instrument panel can keep some of those critical components warm, even if you don't have the luxury of Tanis heaters. Well, you didn't have a hangar, or you couldn't get the aircraft into the hangar, and your aircraft ends up all iced, frosty, snow covered. Hangar to the rescue. The hangar is still the best solution here. Pull the aircraft in the hangar and let it thaw out, warm up. Just use caution for a couple of things. If it happened to be covered in snow, you pull it in the hangar, all that snow melts, all that water runs down to the nooks and crannies of the aircraft, and now we have a problem with putting the aircraft back outside when it's wet and freezing up again, and maybe being worse than if we had just let it could be covered with snow. If you're concerned about finding out if the whole aircraft is actually warmed up once you pull it in the hangar, one good way would be to turn on the battery and look at your oil temperatures and just see how much that hangar time, the spa time for your aircraft actually did get to the inner parts of the helicopter. Just a technique. If it's just frost, just a little bit of frost on the aircraft, it's not actually ice or snow, one technique that works really well is just to run the aircraft up and let the motion of the air actually blow off some of the frost and sublimate the rest. Works really well. Run it long enough to recharge the battery, because we know cold weather doesn't, or batteries don't like cold weather. So run the aircraft long enough to get the battery recharged, and shut the aircraft down. That's the key point here. Climb up, make sure all that frost is gone, and if you can confirm it is, then start back up and go fly. We don't want to do this for any kind of ice or snow, though, because of the possibility of, well, one, imbalance issues. You have an extra heavy rotor blade, and now the aircraft could actually damage itself as it's spooling up. Once it gets to operating RPM, that ice will probably sling off the rotor blade right through a plate glass window if you're not lucky. This happened at a program where I worked a number of years ago. Not a good way to start the day. Some manufacturers actually will allow you to use commercial de-icing fluids, glycol solutions, that type of thing. Like I said before, though, be careful about putting things on your helicopter that aren't meant to be there. Follow the manufacturer's recommendations. If you're not sure, don't do it. And at the end of the day, if none of these ideas work, none of these options work, go back inside, see what's on TV, and when the sun comes out tomorrow, we'll try to get the helicopter defrosted. Important to follow aircraft limitations at any time. Cold weather brings a different set of limitations. I'm going to kind of focus on three major groups here: ambient temperature limits, fuel temperature limits, and battery temperature limits. Ambient temperature, pretty self-explanatory, and most manufacturers are down in the -35, -40. I think at that point you have to ask yourself, do I want to be out in -40 degrees C? And that's probably not, but the aircraft might do it. Fuel temperature, a little different story. Depending on the aircraft, the engine manufacturer, you could find yourself in a situation where it's very easy to be too cold to fly the aircraft without taking further steps. Some aircraft have a fuel temperature gauge, like the Bell 429. The AW139 has a caution light that says fuel icing. And both of those aircraft should not have a problem with cold fuel, because they actually use engine oil, hot engine oil, around the some fuel lines in a fuel heater, if you will, to bring the temperature of the fuel up before it goes to the fuel control, and that actually can avoid the need for fuel anti-icing additives like Prist, for example. Why do we even care about this? Because no fuel is completely dry. You have I know where I fly most of the time, it's a rare occasion we get to actually fill the fuel tank all the way up because of weight and payload considerations. You get some of that ambient air in there, it's got moisture in it, the temperature drops, that moisture condenses. Where does that fuel go, or that water go? Right in the fuel. So we'll talk during pre-flight about some of the considerations there. But we need to make sure that if we don't have a fuel heater to keep that fuel warm and keep that fuel from icing, that we have some kind of an additive to protect against it. I kind of bring up the point, why not have put the anti-icing in anyway? It's not going to really hurt anything. It doesn't cost that much as far as I know. And It does have some antimicrobial capabilities as well. Battery temperature limits. There's a note here that was where it says cold weather operations. This comes out of a flight manual from an AW139. They want you to bring the battery inside if the temperature outside is -20 degrees or less, both main and auxiliary batteries for that aircraft. One great way to do that is to leave the battery in the aircraft and pull the whole aircraft inside. Well, if you can't do that, then go ahead and talk to your mechanic first, but pull the battery out, bring it inside, keep it warm, and then that'll allow you to start up down to those lower ambient limits. Pitot heat, no one wants an icy pitot tube. Lots of reasons for that. Follow manufacturer's guidance here. But a lot of aircraft, Bell aircraft, and I remember the UH-60 said, visible moisture below 4 degrees Celsius. So I've flown with people who have basically, they're watching the temperature gauge and they're saying, it's only 5. I don't need the pitot heat yet. It doesn't hurt anything to turn the pitot heat on. You want that on early so it doesn't ice up. If it's cold out, whether you're in moisture or not, turn it on. If it's wet out, whether it's cold or not, turn it on. It doesn't hurt. Well, if you grab the pitot tube when you shut down and you grab onto the pitot tube after it's been on, that could hurt. But all joking aside, I've actually had people tell me, go ahead and if you have a problem with moisture in the pitot system, turn the pitot heat on in flight and try to dry out some of that air and kind of keep things nice and clean and dry in there. Anti-ice versus de-ice. There is a difference. Anti means prevent, de means remove. So anti-ice is going to keep the ice from forming, and the de-ice will remove it once it's already there. Follow your manufacturer's guidelines here always. I had a little bit of time in an R44, and I remember the flight manual said something about keeping the carburetor air temperature out of the yellow range. So regardless of the time of year, if the air coming into the carburetor is between -19 and 4 degrees or something like that, don't quote me on that, you could end up with carburetor ice. Turbine aircraft, a little bit different story, but we have the same type of idea, inlet icing, and aircraft like the Bell 407 or the UH-60 ask you to turn on the anti-ice in certain ambient conditions. You can also think that even though it may not be snowing or actively precipitating out, any kind of a whiteout takeoff or landing situation could cause the engines to ingest some visible moisture in cold temperatures. So takeoff or landing in cold environments, if you think you're going to have any kind of blowing snow, turn the anti-ice on. Some aircraft have some power limitations associated with that. Just kind of keep an eye out and keep aware of that. We don't want to turn the anti-ice on too late though, because I mentioned anti-ice is supposed to keep it from forming. If we let a big ring of ice form around the inlet to our engine, turn on the anti-ice, guess where that ice is going? Right into the engine, and there goes your engine potentially. The Blackhawk, I remember, had a warning about turning on the windshield anti-ice after ice had already formed and big sheets of ice going up into the engine inlets. Don't want to do that. Blade de-ice equipment is meant to let the ice build up just a little bit and then shed off in small quantities, small enough that it shouldn't hurt anything like your tail rotor or other components of the aircraft. Different aircraft, I think the AW139 finally has an operating anti-ice now. Blackhawk still does, obviously. The S92 is famous for its RIPS system. Every system will operate a little bit differently. Just make sure that you're following the guidance for your particular aircraft. The biggest problem with flying in the snow is visibility. It's kind of hard to see through snow. Snow is not necessarily considered known ice because that definition requires the visible moisture to stick to the aircraft, to actually accumulate on the airframe. Most of the time, and I say most of the time, the snow bounces right off. So I can fly in the snow. I'm in visible moisture, I'm below freezing, the VFR aircraft, non-de-ice capable, I'm fine. Sometimes though, the snow is wet enough and the temperature and moisture content combination is touchy enough that the snow may start to stick. So if I'm flying in snow, I should be looking for little, I call it look at the pointy parts. If you have a windshield wiper that has lots of jagged parts on it that might collect some of that snow, the leading edge of a skid step, a door hinge, something that you can see from the cockpit fairly easily that'll let you know if snow starts to accumulate. If it does, then moisture is freezing to your aircraft, it's starting to accumulate or accrete, and you're now in known icing and you need to get the heck out. Again, have a plan, execute the plan, and get the aircraft on the ground in that case. Always follow your manufacturer's guidance, and I'll just give you a couple of examples here. Snow deflectors on the Bell 407. If you're, don't quote me on this one, but I think if you're flying for more than 15 minutes in the snow in a Bell 407, you have to have the snow baffles on, the snow deflectors. A-Star handles this a little differently. This is out of an old A-Star manual. Tells you when I flew A-Stars last, but the visibility is the key. If the visibility is low enough due to snow and falling snow, then it's heavy enough to cause a problem for the engine inlet, and you're not supposed to fly in it. Moving right along, pre-flight. Bottom line, don't cut corners on the pre-flight, suck it up and do the pre-flight. I remember I said in the very beginning, there's no such thing as bad weather, just poor clothing choices. We want to get the aircraft as clear and as clean as possible, clear off any ice, snow, or frost. Most important for aerodynamic surfaces and inlets. Inlets, take the time to get your flashlight out and look inside the inlet plenum, or look inside the bottom, the lowest point of the inlet. Make sure nothing froze in there that's going to turn into FOD when that ice breaks free. Always a possibility of water in the fuel, so take a fuel sample, sump the tank, get whatever crap is in the bottom of your fuel tank out before you go fly. Wintertime consideration, just be careful. This is a prime time to have that valve stick and dump jet fuel or other fuel all over the ramp. In my humble opinion, if you sump the tank often, the valve usually works pretty well. It's the times when people don't do it ever, and then one day they decide to do the right thing and sump the tank, and they have a problem. Don't slip and fall on the ramp. Be careful about using non-corrosive ice melt, throwing some rock salt on the ramp and then having that melt turn into a salty slurry. Crank the helicopter up and spray that salty water all over the aircraft is not good for the helicopter. So make sure you're using an aviation approved ice melt. Don't fall off the helicopter, obviously, be careful. And we'll kind of delve a little bit into some scare tactics here. Decatur, Texas, I forget what year this happened. This Bell 407 was parked outside, snowed on, and believe it or not, in Texas, they had snow on the aircraft. The snow melted, and then refroze again, created a little bit of an ice chunk in the inlet plenum that the pilot didn't notice on pre-flight, and about 80 feet in the air, flamed out the engine and ended up turning this into a low-rider version of the 407. A little less funny, this EC-130 in Seminole, Oklahoma, 4 serious injuries here. Very similar thing, slightly different reason. The ice had melted, or snow had melted, gone through the inlet barrier filter of the engine intake, and basically refroze on the inside. A few minutes after takeoff, the ice broke free, sucked into the engine, and I think on this one they actually started the engine after the accident. The NTSB tried to recreate they basically tried to start the engine, and it worked just fine when it wasn't full of ice. So be really careful. And then on a very serious and kind of somber note here, 2 people died in this accident. And this happened, I want to say it was 2 weeks later in Oklahoma City in an AS350. Very similar, for those of you who know, it's a very similar intake setup, almost identical actually. And an almost identical thing happened. Ice ingestion shortly after takeoff, and the pilot didn't have very many options, and crashed on the auto rotation to that, I think it was a nursing home parking lot. So real serious reason to keep your pre-flights under control. So we've looked at the weather, we've made a good decision. The helicopter was protected, we did a thorough pre-flight. We're gonna actually start this thing and go fly. Batteries do not like cold weather. So if you can help it out a little bit with an external power start, if that's available to you, always a good idea. Follow your manufacturer's recommendation. Said that a couple times, I guess. If you don't have a hanger or Tannis heaters, take your time on the run up. I'm talking about going from idle RPM up to flight RPM. A couple of big reasons. Getting the oil up to operating temperature. If you don't wait for the oil to warm all the way up, you could have a problem with exceeding the transmission oil pressure limits, engine oil pressure limits, and you could damage seals and cause problems for your helicopter. yes, sir, but I have a FADEC on my aircraft. I have no control over that. Well, then what you're going to want to do is pay attention during normal run-ups and just see how much that pressure increases normally during a normal run-up. See where the pressure is at that point, how warm the oil is, and you may just need to wait a little longer. If you're running up the FADEC, you thought you had it timed right, and you see that pressure starting to go through the roof, put it back in idle, let it warm up a little bit longer, and then continue on. Another good reason to take your time is being on an icy surface. The torque of the aircraft as you run up from idle to flight or whatever mechanism you do to make that happen in your helicopter, you could actually turn the aircraft on the ice. So be careful. If you start to run it up and the aircraft starts to slide, take it back down to idle again. If you have the choice of going a little slower, that's a good way to do it. Run your defroster, demister, window clearer. Use that piece of equipment before you take off. If there's any moisture trapped in the system, the last thing you want to do is decide on liftoff that you want to use the window demister, turn it on, and then have your whole inside of your window go covered with moisture. Now you're kind of inadvertent IMC on a clear night. That wouldn't be a good thing. Taxi and takeoff considerations. Are your skids or wheels frozen to the ground? Oh yeah, but that's only ice, and it wouldn't. It'll break free pretty easily. I actually was a witness to an AS350, an A-Star aircraft that was so frozen to the ground, the pilot didn't know what was going on, and I don't know how, but somehow had over torqued the aircraft. He was well over 100% torque trying to get the aircraft to come off the ground, and he's really lucky it didn't break free at that point. But water had kind of rolled over the helipad throughout the day when it was warm out. Sun went down, got cold, aircraft froze right to the ground. Not a real good thing. Be careful too. Oh yeah, I'll just break it free by moving my pedals. You're putting a lot of torque on that tail boom when the skids are stuck to the ground and you're putting pedal inputs in there. So be very careful about pedal inputs. If it's just barely kind of frosted to the ground, that might be enough to kind of get the skids to slide free and make you feel better about lifting off, but use caution on the pedals. If you have a wheeled helicopter, you might consider rolling forward a couple of feet to make sure that the brakes are not frozen. Yeah, but I'm just going to go ahead and take off from the ground anyway. Well, what if you have an emergency procedure, you need to land single engine, and you didn't make sure your brakes were unfrozen? That could cause a problem. You could blow your tires on the landing. So roll forward a couple feet first before liftoff. You might consider blowing away any snow in the local, if it's fresh snow right around the helicopter, consider blowing that away with the rotor system, with the rotor wash, before actually committing to moving the aircraft. Might take you a few minutes, pulling some power, get a little light on the skids, not too light, we don't want to roll the aircraft over, blow away the snow, and give yourself some good options. Just like in flat light, when you're in whiteout conditions, having a reference point, having something with good contrast to look at is really important. You might consider taking off right from the surface rather than hovering around looking for a different place to take off. That's another technique. Just need to be careful that you could be kind of enveloped in a cloud of snow right at takeoff, and it might take a couple seconds to get out of that cloud, so be prepared for that. One way to avoid that is to consider a towering takeoff technique. So you're right from the surface, go just blast off straight up. Yeah, that's real nice, but it's probably my preferred technique. But if you don't have enough power to do that, that can be a real problem when you end up at 50 feet in the air, stuck in a snow cloud with the inability to climb any further. The only way out of that at that point is to transition to instruments, slight nose low attitude, maintain your climb power, and hope the aircraft accelerates forward and there's nothing in front of you to run into. Couple en route considerations. We'll talk about flat light again when we get into landing, but flat light conditions are definitely a factor en route. If you have a choice, stay in a brightly lit area, stay out of the shadows, but oftentimes we don't have that choice. I'm flying over a snow-covered lake on a gray overcast day and flat light's really kicking my butt. Why not fly along the shoreline where the trees are, and I have a little bit of those brown tree trunks and the branches give me some contrast and some points of reference to keep me right side up. Any good helicopter pilot is always looking for forced landing areas. Hey, if this thing quits, I'm going to go over here. If some of the chip light comes on, I need to land as soon as possible, I'm going to go over there. You're flying over a snow-covered field. It's been a couple days. The snow's been blowing around. Where do I set this thing down? I'd recommend setting it down in a brown spot. someplace where there's a high point in the terrain, the snow is blown clear of it, it could be big enough to put your skids on, and you know at that point you're not dealing with a nasty slope underneath. You land in just solid white snow in an area that you're not sure about. The snow might be level, but as soon as you settle into the snow, you could roll the aircraft over. So you just caution there. At nighttime, I mentioned flying in the snow. We could use our landing light or searchlight to look out and see if it actually is precipitating. Hey, I think I see snow out there. Turn on the landing light. Oh yeah, there's definitely snow out there. Then I pull out the flashlight and I start looking around for accumulation on pointy parts of the helicopter. Make sure it's not actually sticking to me. That's not all bad news about. I think the people from southern climates have already tuned out now. To heck with this, we're not going. But the nice thing about flying in a cold weather environment, especially in a snowy area, is a fresh snow on the ground and a moonlit night. It's practically daylight out there. It's beautiful. Here's a fun picture. In the landing phase, flat light is extremely dangerous. In this particular picture, flat light's not a problem. You can see there's a big, pretty stark shadow of the helicopter. You can, even if you look closely, you can see the little tracks of the snowmobile path by the pilot's right rear skid. This pilot had an easy time visibility-wise, but on a different day with an overcast sky, he may have chosen to land a little closer to those trees in the distance to give him some visibility. Like that really experienced pilot told me one day, look for a blade of grass. He even said, drop a rock out the window into the snow, and just the hole in the snow might be enough to give you enough reference to not lose your bearings in a flat light situation. I will say at this point, the most important thing about this, as some of you, at least one of you, heard that and said, wait, you're going to drop a rock from the aircraft and use the hole in the snow as a reference? What the heck are you doing? Don't even land there. And that's really a really important point. If it's not something you're comfortable doing, you haven't done it before successfully, and you find yourself thinking to yourself, this is stupid. You just look over to your passenger and say, I'm sorry, sir, ma'am, the conditions up here today are not going to let us land safely. I'm going to have to take you down to the next road crossing where I have some good references and some good contrast. We're just not going to be able to land here. So learning to say no on the departure as well as the landing is important. And of course, we'll see here in a second, always have an escape route. You got to find a suitable spot close to that good reference for flat light, away from hidden hazards such as rocks, stumps, or otherwise. How did this pilot know that his left skid was going to end up on fresh snow and his right skid was going to end up on a snowmobile path? No way to know that until he sat down. And when the aircraft lurched to the side, he just kind of held his breath and said, oh God. And when the aircraft didn't roll over, he counted his blessings. He got out, took a snow shovel, and actually dug out the right skid to level the aircraft so he could get out of there. So it's not always what you see, it's what you can't see in that case. Everybody wants to talk about their favorite approach techniques. Oh, I always use the hover down technique. Well, actually, if it's snowed enough, that might take you quite a while. Do you have the fuel to do that? Do you have the power to sit up there at 60 or 70 feet and then slowly work yourself down, keeping above the snow cloud? Has it snowed enough to where the snow will never go away? Who knows? Normal approach to a zero ground run landing just to a point, that works really well if you can stay ahead of the snow cloud and time it just right so you're not enveloped by the cloud. The running landing technique is my least favorite, only because you have to really know what's underneath the ground. Can you imagine if this pilot here had employed the running landing technique to avoid a whiteout and had touched down on that snowmobile path and skidded to a stop as his left skid went off the edge? He very likely would have rolled the aircraft over. So that's a technique we want to be very careful. It's really great to keep away from the snow cloud, but it's kind of dangerous as far as the risk of rollover. Always have an escape plan. Can't say that enough. One pilot told me one time, if you have an escape plan, have multiple escape routes. When you're down to your last one, take it and get out of there. Kevin actually mentioned bear paw settling protectors, the snowshoes on the back of the skids of their helicopters. Really helpful devices. One thing to keep in mind, they're not meant to hold the whole helicopter out of the snow, just the tail rotor. So the aircraft will settle forward, and in deep enough snow, the belly of the aircraft may actually be in the snow. So just be real careful if you've had your landing light on that it doesn't go into the snow and blow itself up due to the sudden cooling. Getting close to the end here. Shutdown. If you're on a slippery surface, be careful how quickly you move from flight to idle. If you have a rotor brake, be careful how quickly you apply the rotor brake. The aircraft could turn. Blade de-ice considerations. Your aircraft may have some limitations about cool down of the blades, or there may be some notes about components of the rotor system that may have gotten hot during that operation. Make sure to read your RFM there for advice. Once you shut down, your aircraft is warm. If it's snowing out or precipitating, that snow will initially melt. And if you stay out there long enough in cold temperatures, it could refreeze again. So just kind of keep an eye out. You might want to try to get covers on as soon as possible if you're going to be shut down for a while. And on the subject of being shut down for a while, you may not get this aircraft started again once you shut it down. So be real careful about how long you let it sit. I flew for a program at one point that because we didn't have TANF and they wouldn't let us put it in the hangar, we had to go out and start the aircraft every 2 hours during the night to make sure it didn't get too cold. Not fun, but it helps. Couple of last minute or kind of extra things. I wasn't sure really where to put these in the rest of the presentation. Be aware of the increased danger of stronger static electricity charges in the cold and dry air. Be aware that not just your aircraft battery may perform poorly, but your phone, tablet, have extra batteries or a way to charge those things. Flying a piston aircraft using the heater, a carbon monoxide detector is a must. Maybe even carry one of your own personal ones, not just a little cardboard thing in the aircraft. And then in the spring and fall or the summer months, exercise the heater and window demister to keep that valve working properly. I think Airbus has a notice about the EC-135 for that. Follow your manufacturer's guidance, obviously, but you can do things like that in the off season to make sure all your equipment works when you need it. So at this point, that's the end of my official presentation here. I know we're going to open the floor to some questions and answers, and I'll throw my contact information up there. If you don't want to chime in with the official question and answer, you want to send me a note, feedback, good points, bad points. I hope I learned something today too, and I appreciate your time. Thanks.
There we go. Now I'm unmuted. Thank you, Scott. That was an amazing amount of information. Kevin, I'd like to go ahead and invite you to bring your camera back up if you're still with us. Scott, that was a lot of information really pretty rapidly. So I would like to let our viewers know, remind our viewers that these are being recorded. And all of the videos for this presentation and all of our webinars are always available at rotor.org/webinars. The next webinar presentation is always in the left column, and our archive is in the right column. So if there's something you missed down the road or you would just have some time to kill at an FBO, go back and look at some of our webinars. I'm sure you'll find something that will be of interest. I do want to appreciate, get this name right, Sean Smith, who has commented that he does watch a lot of our webinars on video. We do appreciate that, Sean. Encourage other people to go back and look at them as well. Kevin, let's start with you real quick. I'm just curious, do you have anything you'd like to add based on what you've heard with Scott?
Yeah, great presentation, Scott. I agree 100% on everything you said. One thing that I didn't hit on when my introductory thing was, you're absolutely right about survival gear. We do have some in the aircraft that I didn't touch on. We have some survival sleeping bags, and the aircraft has a survival pack, and each crew member has their own personal. But the key to that, as Scott did, is in a crash situation, if you don't have it on you, you're probably not going to have it at all. So like I too have a survival pack in my flight gear or my flight suit. The other mantra that we have that goes perfectly with your presentation is land and live. If you're presented with a horrible situation, don't push it. Go, oh, I'll just punch in and fly it. Hey, if you got a place you can land and ride out the weather, absolutely land and live. And that's always in the back of my mind when I'm flying the Sierras. It's like, hey, okay, I'm at the worst scenario here. What are my options? And if landing and living and riding a cool night out in a helicopter will keep me alive, the aircraft safe, and everybody alive, we're going to do that as well. And we have, like, the one thing that you always hear about aircraft limitations, I advocate personal limitations. Have your own limitations that you're not going to exceed, and go, hey, today these are my personal limitations. This is as far as I'm going to take this flight. You know, you have aircraft limitations, you have regulations. You should have your own personal limitations as well.
No, really appreciate that. I think absolutely, the more you can be prepared, the more you can think about it ahead of time, the better off you're going to be when the situation presents itself. And so even if you're I don't know if there's simulator training, you know, I imagine there has to be simulator training for winter conditions. And so taking advantage of something like that, you know, during downtime in the fall, I think it makes a lot of sense. We do have a bunch of questions, or a handful of questions that have come in. I'd like to start with one from Richard Alberts, and he does have a follow-up, so we'll get to that one in a second. On a practical level, when operating at high altitudes, how do you deal with freezing levels, less than 5 degrees Celsius, specifically icing as you climb into high altitudes and low temperatures? And I'm not sure either one of you go ahead and take an answer on that one.
Scott?
Sure, I'll take a stab at that one. I think, how do we deal with the decreasing temperatures at higher altitudes? Going back to the whole idea of being in the clouds or not, like we just don't go invisible moisture when it's that cold. The filing IFR and going up to that altitude is just not going to be, unless we have functioning de-ice equipment. If it's VFR, one thing, and I hope this kind of gets to his point, my personal minimums and my comfort level with being with accepting a VFR flight, when there are when the freezing level is below the minimum safe altitude, my comfort level goes down, my minimums go up, and I just decide early, I'm not going to mess around with it, because I know even if I'm in a VFR equipped aircraft, I'm not planning on going in the clouds. I know that if I did, it's not necessarily an instant death sentence if I'm prepared for it. But in the icing conditions, that they very well could be. So when I don't have the option, and especially if I'm flying an IFR equipped aircraft, and I have the option to just, I'll pick up an IFR and continue on, the freezing level up there above me will sometimes just keep me on the ground, because I know I don't have that option anymore.
Yeah, I use a 4 degree in visible moisture. So if we're getting down to 4 degrees C and I start seeing visible moisture, whether it's rain or light snow, that's when we got to start going, okay, what are we doing and should we continue? Typically, my personal limitation when it comes to VFR limitations, like your minimums, I don't launch or do anything that's going to take me down to VFR minimums unless it's a life-saving mission. Because, I mean, that is the minimums, right before you go invert 9C or right before you punch into icing conditions, you're right on that line. It's like, what is this really worth it? And for me, the only thing that's going to get me that close to those limits, it's going to be a life-saving mission. If it's just a search or anything else, we're just not going to
go. Actually, this question, I'm going to jump around a little bit. This came in from Gordon Harwell. He asked it for Scott, but Kevin, you almost answered it just then. Can you discuss some of the additional guidance for avoiding operating in icing conditions? You mentioned 5 degrees Celsius and visible moisture. He says this is kind of pedantic, but can you discuss what constitutes visible moisture, you know, such as low visibility, snow, fog? He does appreciate the presentation from both of you so far as well.
It's going to either be really, I mean, when you're doing your weather planning, are these just fluffy clouds or are they clouds with some serious moisture content? Do I see anything on the air? You know, if you start picking up that light misting from thicker air, that's visible moisture, and that coupled with the low temperatures, icing happens in seconds. So it's not like, oh, we're going to slowly get cooler. You can, bam, you're right into some icing conditions, and you'll go, wow, it's starting to flip.
I'll add to that, and I'm going to open up a can of worms here. I had the opportunity to talk to one of the NTSB's meteorologists, accident investigator that kind of investigates the weather aspect. And I actually asked him, I said, you know, the weather forecast says it's 4 miles BR, 4 miles in mist. Well, is it really mist? Like, what are they talking about? And that condition, mist, is a visibility reduction due to moisture content in the air. It's not quite enough to call it fog, but it is water in the air that's causing that visibility reduction. So I then said, so am I now in visible moisture? If it's cold out, then I have a visibility reduction that says mist. He said, well, technically, yes. I said, well, most importantly, are you going to blame this accident on me? Conditions? And he said, well, that could be a factor. So I think to say, well, if there's mist in the observation, you can't fly if it's cold. I think there's a certain point where that might be a little. If you're not comfortable with it, it's not too conservative. But there might be a fair number of pilots who would say, yeah, I'm comfortable doing that. The thing to consider there, to go back to Kevin's point of having a plan, is that's the kind of thing that should catch your attention. And you say, okay, so I'm going flying. I've decided to go. The visibility is good enough, but it's cold out in mist. I really need to make, now taking that flight up into the Sierras and now I'm going over a path that's completely just solid forest. Maybe I'm not going to go that way. Maybe I'll take the highway and where I have some highway pull-offs and I can mitigate the risk of that visible moisture by having an out and having a place to land along the way. Hopefully that didn't derail from his original question too much.
No, I think it addressed it well. Let's actually, this was brought up a second ago, Kevin, and this might apply both to your military experience and with the California Highway Patrol. Do you operate at a different standard for risk versus gain when you operate in a public use aircraft?
Oh yeah, I've done safety briefs on both, and the one thing I always argue with the stateside soldiers, and obviously in EMS and all that applies, is combat's different. There's an inherent danger in combat, and there are risks, and there are high risk missions that you as a combat soldier have to take. There is no mission in the EMS world and the civilian side that you go, okay, there's going to be some known losses. That is unacceptable on stateside missions. There's just no reason to go, yeah, we may leave, but we may not come back. No, that goes back to that first, their emergency isn't my emergency. I'll do everything in my power, our training, the aircraft to get there, facilitate the rescue. But at the end of the day, as Scott said, people are going to die. It's just a bad situation. And as rescuers and people, we try to help prevent it, but bad things happen.
Jump back to the second part of Rich Albert's first question or second part. And I think, Scott, you might have already answered it, but let's maybe get a little bit of clarification. How do you legally fly in snow but keep yourself from flying into icing when temperatures are freezing?
I think I'll break that into a couple different parts. One, you have hopefully your personal minimums, but definitely not to go below your regulatory minimums for visibility. That's going to be what's going to be the biggest concern with snow, is the snow actually obscuring your ability to see where you're going. If the snow is not heavy enough to obscure that, then you've met that legality. The other legality is, am I allowed to fly into known icing conditions? A VFR aircraft, I can't fly into known icing. An IFR aircraft, I shouldn't fly into known or forecast icing unless I have the equipment. So when it comes to snow, as I mentioned in my presentation, and I know that did kind of go pretty quickly, it could be wet snow or it could be dry snow. The snow is going to bounce off the aircraft or it's not. If it does, and most of the time it does, I've flown in a lot of snow, and most of the time it's pretty, fly around, fly in the snow, it looks nice. It doesn't stick to the aircraft. So that does not meet the definition of known icing because it doesn't actually accumulate on the airframe. And if I take the flight with the reasonable expectation that I'm not going to encounter that sticking to the aircraft situation, then I'm totally legal to go fly in those conditions. The very moment that I notice it start to stick, that's why I make the point of keeping an eye on it. Don't just get complacent. Look for the snow to start building up. When I start seeing, like when you're driving your car and you start seeing your mirror start to ice up on the leading edge of it, when you start seeing that on the leading edge of parts of your helicopter, that's the time you're now in known icing conditions, and now your job is to get out of them in a safe way. And again, you're over the middle of a forest or something and you're not really sure, then maybe just turn around and go home, even if you haven't noticed it accumulate yet. You're not illegal yet, but why find out that you're getting there when you've now reduced your options to land or turn around?
And the one thing I'll piggyback on that is, a lot of times snow level, it's way higher than the aircraft. So you're in a temperature zone that you're like, oh, okay, well, temperature-wise, we're fine. The snow's coming from way up above us. It hasn't melted yet. So that's where a lot of people like, you may not be at freezing temperatures, but you're still getting snowed on.
In that situation, the snow's going to hit your helicopter. It's going to melt, turn into a little water droplet, and you'll see it kind of run down the windscreen and go, okay, that's good. Now when it runs and stops, that's when you have a problem.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, I got so engrossed, I realized we've gone past our normal stop time. Are you guys okay with going a little while longer? We've got another handful of questions still that
Yeah,
we can go as I think we can go as long as you want to go. I promise I won't go much more than about another 10 minutes though. For Michael Cook, do you recommend temperatures that stop operations other than published aircraft limitations? And if so, do you factor in wind chill in such decisions?
I don't. I think hard numbers. I mean, yeah, you can. Yeah, that's kind of a touchy subject of putting absolutes in there, but some. I mean, extremes. Yeah, extremes are good, but everything else is. You got to take the situation as a totality.
yeah, and I'll piggyback on that a little bit. It kind of comes down to what how well you're prepared. If it's negative 39 and you're within the limitations for your aircraft, can you survive being out in the cold and negative 39? Sure, if you have Arctic boots and an Arctic parka and all the equipment you need to keep yourself warm if you end up out there. One thing to think about, instead of a hard temperature, if it's less than negative 15 degrees, I'm not going to go, might be, okay, if I take this flight and halfway there, I have to land because my aircraft broke or I got into bad weather. If I was going to be there for 12 hours or for a day, would I survive that? Would I want to do that? Would I be comfortable? And if the answer is no, then there's your answer about whether the temperature is too cold or not.
Okay, let me. This is from Gary Reedy, and can both of you just kind of quickly list what's in your personal survival kits again, please?
The basics. Mine's about 12 pounds. It's always shelter, fire, water. Because I always tell guys at work, if I'm out there longer than a day, we're going to come back and I'm going to fight you. But that's a joke. But those are the basics: shelter, fire, water, some clothing, personal comfort stuff for temperatures, definitely. And that's it. It's survival. It's not camping. So, and it's just to keep me alive long enough to get rescued.
And I'll add on to that. I mean, all of those things, that's pretty much the same list: fire, shelter, water, some way to signal if you're in a wilderness environment, like a signal mirror or something. I've got a whistle in my little kit here that I guess if somebody was getting close and I didn't have the strength to yell help, like maybe I could blow the whistle. Maybe even more important than that, though, is one of those, I'm not making an endorsement for a particular company, but those little spot personal locators. If you don't have the equipment on your aircraft or an operational center that's actually tracking you and knowing where to look for you, you're just having your own personal aircraft to go in cross country, bring that. I mean, I have a friend who was hiking the Sierra, what's the trail that goes up and down California, all the way from
Pacific Crest.
That's the one. He ended up getting airlifted out of right up near the Oregon border. And what saved his life was that little personal locator where he basically fell, broke a bunch of stuff, couldn't move, pulled out his locator and started texting with the rescue people at that point. Got his pinpointed location, sent out the Navy, and they picked him up. So some kind of way to let people know where you are and maybe some kind of personal locator or a GPS device if you can move and you want to walk yourself out someplace to know which way to go.
Pound for pound, the best thing I'm a huge advocate for is Hunter Orange. In all the years of doing search and rescue, the #1 color that stands out in any condition is Hunter Orange, that bright orange. Weather, doesn't matter if you have overcast, snow, forest, doesn't matter. Orange is that best. Have something of that color in your survival pack and you will be seen from the air.
You beat me to it, Kevin. I was going to ask if there was one particular item that you had in mind that does help to attract the attention of a pilot. So,
yeah, it's the best color.
Okay, next question is from Jessica Miras. Scott, you had mentioned a 10 to 15 minute flight time in light snow for turbine aircraft straight out of the pilot operating handbook. Do you have any sense of what the difference would be for a piston aircraft? I haven't seen specific pilot operating handbook specifications for those conditions.
I'm going to have to go ahead and acknowledge that I don't know. I don't think, no, I'm trying to think of I mean, I have, most of my time is turbine. I have about 10 hours in a Robinson just for fun, and it was kind of fun. I want to say the air intake for combustion is on the side of the aircraft, so the chance of that icing over is probably not as great. But I don't have a good solid answer. I'm sorry.
I got 0 15 times.
If Jessica, if we get an answer from somebody in our audience, or if somebody on our staff can follow up, we'll do our best to get an answer for you out of that. From Heather Cook, how do you approach CRM when it comes to making the decision to go flying in marginal conditions? Do you talk it over with your TFO or co-pilot about their personal limitations in going for the flight with the current or forecasted conditions?
Yeah, we have a saying: 2 to go, one to say no. So either crew member. The big thing that's huge with crew resource management is talking early. Hey, I'm uncomfortable with what we're about to go do. I mean, in my career, I've had flight officers tell me that, hey, I'm uncomfortable, and we'll talk about it. And after the discussion, if they're still uncomfortable, we just cancel the mission. Usually it's weather centric. They're like, hey, we're flying into some marginal weather, and I'll explain, hey, I have an out. This is my backup plan. Discuss exactly what we're about to go do. Even though you do that when you leave, things change. Now things have gotten worse. They're feeling uncomfortable. The earlier, the better the crew discusses that. Don't get to the point where finally goes, oh, I'm not comfortable. And then it goes, oh, I was uncomfortable 10 minutes ago. That's the worst case scenario. Just go, it's okay to go, hey, I'm starting to feel uncomfortable. And they go, yeah, me too. I'm going to go to that next peak, see if I can see a little bit better. And if it's worse, we're just going to cancel. So the earlier the discussion about limitations or what you're about to go do, it changes. So you constantly have to have that conversation.
I'd like to piggyback on that a little bit, Dan. And from the air ambulance side of things, I'll oftentimes take it a little step further, and we'll be sitting around the base or watching whatever's on TV, you know, and the weather's marginal that day. The crew will often ask, you know, hey, so how's the weather looking? Well, it's not so great. I'll actually throw in some specifics and say, well, if they called me to go from here to there, I probably would say no because of this. If they called me to go from there to there, it'd be kind of a judgment call, and I think we could get it done, but we might get stuck down there. And then kind of talk through a lot of those things, kind of have that conversation before the pressure's really on. Because when the phone rings and they say, hey, you have a flight request, you got to go. Well, I don't have to go for one, but we're asking you to go. Okay, guys, I think we should give it a try. If you've already talked about it, I've actually had this happen to me once and I felt really bad about it. I'm admitting this to the whole world now, but talk to the crew. Hey, look, if we get a flight request, I'm not going to go because of X, Y, Z. We get a flight request. I think we should go. And they said, wait, half an hour ago, you said we shouldn't go. What changed? You're right. Nothing really did change. I just felt a little bit of the pressure to go. And so it was kind of right on the edge. And when I didn't have the pressure, I made a good decision not to go. So in that case, I said, okay, we're going to turn it down for weather. And so that having the conversation early before you even get the request is sometimes another technique on the CRM side.
Yeah, and we'll also discuss like weather check. Obviously, extreme weather, it goes without saying. There's those days it's marginal and you're like, can we go? Well, I'm getting conflicting weather information. We'll go, hey, let's go do a weather check. We'll launch. And a lot of times we'll go, oh, obviously the sensors on the ground are reporting one thing, but I can clearly see a different scenario and go, yeah, we can continue. Or you go, yeah, no, it's just as bad. Let's go back.
This is a question that occurred to me a little while ago, or Cam Turnbull, is asking, is there value in crews taking a winter survival course? I know a friend of ours, of our association, Ilan Head at Vertical Magazine, took a winter survival course up in Canada a few years ago. Is that something you recommend?
Absolutely. We do, every couple of years, we'll do winter survival and summer survival training. The best part is everybody goes and gets their cool survival equipment and tools and this and that, and everybody brings it out. You'll learn, that doesn't work. Oh, that works great. Hey, I like that. Good idea. it brushes up your survival techniques, tells you what, hey, I bought this really cool thing, threw it in my survival pack, never used it, now I need it, and it's worthless. So you get to try the stuff you're going to have in your survival pack. So absolutely.
Okay. Let's see here. I think we've got somebody who has an answer on the piston engine question. I'm trying to bring them up here in just a second. I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead to what I normally would be my last question. And while I try to bring this person on, what would be the most important thing that you would like our viewers to take away today from this webinar? Scott, maybe you can go first.
Sure. I think I'm going to make it two things that are kind of closely related. One is never stop learning, never stop asking questions, never stop admitting that you might be wrong about something, and talk. If you don't know, find an expert and learn from it. And the other is just because somebody else can do something doesn't mean it's something that you should be doing yourself. So the minute you start thinking to yourself, I'm not so comfortable, I don't think I should be doing this, don't. Whether it's a weather call, whether it's a snow landing, whatever the case, just you get more experience by not pushing yourself too far beyond your limits. If you go too far beyond your limits, you end up dead, and that's not experienced.
Okay, Kevin, what about you?
Yeah, I like Scott's answer. Never stop learning, constantly. That's what I do as well. The thing, as I said earlier, is no flight is worth your life. That's counterproductive to what we all do. So proper planning, know your personal limitations, and keep learning are the best three things you can do. And just go, their emergency or that flight isn't worth our lives. So.
Okay, appreciate that, Scott and Kevin. And I'd like, we have John Quackenbush joining us. He says he has an answer about flight time and light snow for piston aircraft. John, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Appreciate your joining us today. Thank you so much.
Well, first thing, I just want to thank you guys. All the information you put out is really good. I've been flying for 50 years, so I operated in mountainous terrain in pillars and Bell 47 G3B1s, pouring cement in the mountains and things like that. And snow surveys, wintertime ops, when we used to take a 2x6 and clamp it to the crossways on the skids for to keep the rear at the rear of the skids to keep them out of the snow when you land. That was before they made snow pads and things. So the answer to piston engines, basically they have carb heat like an airplane. So you run your carburetor heat, it would be like inlet anti-icing on your turbine engine. And I forget exactly what the question was, but it's kind of like running your anti-ice on your turbine engines, and all the other restrictions pretty much apply. But that's what you deal with. And the colder temperatures, when you guys, the one thing that with the colder temperatures, normally snow and kind of that ice mix in the air is normally going to go right through the engine. Where they have particles separator filter, the really fine when it's cold, and that's why the worst thing, and you want to keep the engine, and a lot of the modern helicopters, I fly 407s a lot. It's really nice having that temperature gauge right on the dashboard where I can read it. And I look at that all the time. If it's really cold, which I did a lot heliskiing for years, you're always looking at that temperature. And when it's really cold, the snow doesn't bother you. A light snow, it's that wet snow. It's that right around freezing, just below freezing, right around freezing, couple degrees above freezing is where things really get touchy for the snow sticking to the aircraft, coating up your particle separator or your filter, and all of that really happens right around freezing. If you get those conditions, you got to get colder or warmer, go up or go down, but you cannot fly in that stuff.
Okay, John, well, we appreciate your input today. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching as well. Scott, Kevin, I can't begin to tell you how much I appreciate you joining us today as well. The information was incredibly valuable. I know that there will probably be many people coming in to watch this in the video after it's posted live, or after we get it posted rather. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for sharing your information, and thank you for your contributions to keeping our industry safer.
Thanks.
Glad to be here.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up now. Kevin and Scott, I invite you to go ahead and turn your cameras off, and I will get my screen back up. We did promise this earlier on in the webinar when Jim introduced it. The 56 seconds to live video that's brand new from the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team. It is completely relevant. It discusses introduction into meteorological conditions. It's a great video. I've watched it. I'm not a pilot, and it made a big impact on me. You can find that here at the web address on the screen. I'm going to leave it on for just a second. If you're watching this on video later on, perhaps you can pause it and write it down. It's certainly worth the time to watch this video. This is, as Jim mentioned, just the first step in a larger educational program, safety program that will address this topic. And we will be having a webinar on that. I believe it's going to be in April, where we'll be talking more about this 56 seconds to live program. Next, one other thing we'd like to always remind people about is you can get more information subscribing to Rotor Magazine. We do hope to have a subscription option there for Rotor Daily again fairly soon. There's a lot of good information that comes out. Again, good way to keep track of things that's going on in the industry. Just go to rotor.org/subscribe, and that will get you subscribed to the magazine. And again, hopefully we'll have something for Rotor Daily too. Next week, we do have a big change. We've been telling people that the webinar for next week, the Mill to Civ webinar, would take place at 1700, 5 p.m. Eastern time. That has changed. We are now looking at 6 p.m. Eastern time. This will be a later webinar for everybody. We do apologize, but our panelists are active people in our industry, and they were simply not able to make it. We felt that this was important enough that we wanted to go ahead and hold it live rather than trying to do a recording so that people could ask questions. That is next week at 6 p.m. Please share this information with anybody you know that's in the military. I know that there were quite a number of military and first responder people signed up for the webinar today. Please share this as far and as wide as you can. It doesn't matter if you're not getting out of the military right away. Planning ahead, just like we talked about for this topic today, will help make that transition so much easier down the road. Our panelists have all done this. They have all transitioned from military to civilian life, and they're happy to share their experiences and their advice for people who are getting ready to go on. Coming up in the future, we don't have a lot of information at the moment, but I can tell you right now that we do have committed in March and April a couple of the biggest names in the helicopter industry. We are really excited that they're going to be able to join us, and we're looking forward to it. I don't want to spoil a surprise quite yet. As always, we do have a follow-up questionnaire coming shortly. We do ask that you take a few minutes to respond to the questionnaire. It helps us to guide what we produce and post for webinars. And as always, we'd love to know what you think HAI could do better for you. We are doing our best to increase our safety and advocacy programs to better serve our members. And so we always want to know what you think. The easiest way to do that is to use the the email address, president@rotor.org. That goes straight to Jim Viola. He does see all the emails that come in, and he does assign them to our staff members for tasking. So until next week, we ask that you fly safe, that you be safe, and we do look forward to having you join us again next week. Thank you so much.